Hi, everybody. Welcome to the FanCon celebration weekend. We're having a chat tonight with a couple of comic book creators. We are chatting to Mark Jackson, Bill Masuku, and Ray Whitcher, and they'll be sharing a little bit of their work. So some of these guys have been around for quite a while, like Ray Whitcher obviously needs no introduction at all, so we probably want to jump into his work first.
Hello, FanCon. My name is Ray Whitcher, and I'm one of the artists that's going to be presenting during the festival, the digital festival that we're going to be seeing over the next few days. So, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me, and I hope that I can give you some interesting insight into the world of South African comic making and just the various aspects that we have to go through, as well as demonstrate some of the products that I'll be launching, and also to answer some questions from our moderator, Moray. The next most important thing today is just to actually show you a little bit of my work, and to tell you a little bit about what I'm launching, what I've been up to, and obviously the kind of comics you can expect from me, Ray. So, I'd like to introduce you firstly to my title, Spook. Spook is a new title, and it's got one issue out so far, and I'm currently working on a second issue at the moment. So I'm aiming to have that one out by September latest. So Spook follows the adventures of a not so conventional mercenary, and essentially what he gets up to for his day job. And so some interesting stuff happens. I don't want to give away too many spoilers because his name's already a bit of a spoiler. But I wanted to introduce a great anti-hero that people can enjoy and have fun with. So he's very along the lines of Deadpool and even Deathstroke, and we all know the story behind those two. And you're kind of typical anti-heroes, but at the same time, I think I added a lot of South Africanness to him. So there's a little bit of relatability to Spook as a character and what he gets up to as well. And I think that's what I'd like you as an audience to enjoy. So when we look at Spook as a title, I've given you a little bit of a mix of pages because again, I do want you to buy this book, so I'm not going to give you too much context. But little things like that is that I wanted to show that when he's speaking to people, he uses words like chom and spook and all sorts of different kinds of very South African words and slang. And I wanted to also give a kind of demonstration of the sort of characters you see in the comic. And obviously, you can tell from my art style, I'm very influenced by animation. I've always been, and it's something that I value very highly as an artist, is kind of getting the kind of animation sensibilities of character blocking and silhouettes and just the way they work and function. And so you'll see I often have moments like this where you get some little slightly dodgy Afrikaans rhymes as he's busy doing his job, because Spook really, really likes doing what he does. So if you look in the top left corner, he's busy shooting a couple of tokolosh, and he's busy singing a song while he's doing it because he's so overconfident that basically no one can stop him from doing what he does. My other comic and my big baby is called Wanton. Wanton, just like Spook, is a very localized comic. So it's set a little bit in the future, not too far, but just a little bit in the future. And the premise of the comic is that there was this great war, and kind of similar to World War II, just a little bit different, because what happened in this universe is that because of the desperation and grief and loss that happened because of this war, people started believing in gods again because they literally had nothing else to believe in. So they needed faith, they needed something, and so they started begging anything and everything they could think of. And because of this excess, this wanton belief that started happening, all the traditional creatures and monsters and gods that we thought were once fables and myths actually came back. I also like to put in some in-jokes, so if any of you are fans of IT Crowd, that cuke is very much there for a reason. So that's the sort of things I've done here. So for you, for the local Joburgers, this is the Carlton Centre. So if you've ever been to the CBD, it's definitely a building you know. So again, it's that locality, using local words and putting that kind of Joburgness into it that I really want you to resonate with when you're an artist. So this one's still on issue 1. It's the reason being is I had to hold it back a bit because I'm actually doing it also as an academic project in my PhD studies of Wits. So it's taking a bit longer, but that's because I have to do quite a bit of background stuff while I'm working on this particular comic. So bear with me. The second issue is coming, just a little bit slower than Spook is, but it will be there, I promise. But yeah, so I still have lots of copies of this available. It's also available in both English and Southern Sesotho, and it's fully translated by the Wits Languages Department. Again, I wanted it to be accessible. I wanted it to be readable to many people. So as I go, I will be translating it into several languages. So I just wanted to start with Sesotho because my two Shangaan and Inyanga characters are actually Sotho speaking. So I wanted to make sure that I could get the language right before I moved on. It's a difficult question to answer because on the one hand, we have an incredibly creative and productive and really exciting industry out there. I wouldn't say so much industry is seen though, because we have a lot of creative people that are making some really amazing work, but the majority of us are busy doing it on an independent capacity. So the difficulty that we're facing here is that we don't really have publishers. We don't have access to things like publishing. And so most of us either go the webcomic direction, or we self-publish and then sell at conventions like FanCon. And they both have pros and cons, but obviously the big dream would be to have mass distribution. And one of the ways of getting there is obviously getting our work out there to people like you, people that are interested in South African comics, that want to buy South African comics, and getting people to speak about them, to consume them, to read them, and then giving us feedback and telling us what you like and don't like about them. Comics are such an interactive and immersive thing as it is, and I think that's the important thing here. And I'm sure my fellow panelists will feel the same way, especially someone like Bill, who comes from Zimbabwe. And where we're all trying to figure out the best way to go forward here. And definitely it seems more and more like digital comics are taking the foreground here. But at the same time, a lot of us still see the value and enjoy and love the traditional feel of comics that are printed on paper. And I particularly like to print my work, and I always will print my work because that's just something I do. And I think that's something that's definitely we can't lose, but at the same time, is it still viable for us to do these sort of things? And a lot of these questions are also arising from my actual daytime career. So I'm a lecturer at Wits University in Joburg, and one of the main fields of research that I follow is actually comic studies. And so I'm looking at the value and how you make comics for specific audiences, what the meanings of comics actually are and how they've changed over the last few years, and just generally the power of the medium, because they're such important things. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. It's just how much value and how much importance comics actually hold. And so I'm hoping that through conventions like FanCon, you guys as fans get to see these things and get to support us as makers, because without you, there's no reason to do this. We're not making these comics for ourselves. We want people to be fans. We want people to cosplay our work. We want people to enjoy our stuff. And I think that's the big thing here. And so that's why I'm hoping that we can grow and support and encourage people to constantly buy local and to find that kind of that balance between supporting comics in general, because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but at the moment, even the big guys like DC and Marvel are struggling. And comic sales, particularly now during the COVID pandemic, have dropped substantially. In fact, it's a known statistic that most comic publishers, including Marvel and DC, only make a 6% profit on their work at the moment. So it's kind of scary for us. And that's why we really do need your support. You need to support your local comic shops, and you need to buy comics from people, because at the end of the day, that's the only way to grow this industry and to get people and to actually support new creators as well. Thank you so much for watching my stuff, and yeah, please support local comics and actually African comics in general. Thank you guys. Bye for now.
Great to see you guys. I know it's a weird time. It's a weird time to be a comic book artist, but at the same time, life doesn't really change for us at the desk and at home. And over the last couple of months, it's just been a wild ride in terms of production. In January, I did a late application for sustainable development for the British Council. They were looking for 6 storytellers across Southern Africa, and I didn't think I had a fighting chance. A lot of the credentials were for people who were already in sustainable development, the green economy, and so on and so forth. And as much as I'm interested in that, I'm primarily a comic book artist. But the coordinator there thought it would be interesting to have a a comic surrounding that. So that's one of the projects I'm working on for the British Council. I've also been inking for a Nigerian comic called Nani. It got nominated for a Nomo Award. And two of the other things that I've been doing, Captain South Africa and Welcome to Dead World also got nominated for Nomo Awards, so that's great. It's tough working alone, but there's a freedom to creativity that I'm seeing it's starting to pay off now. But there's some gaps in the workload that I can definitely see, which is why building the industry, I can't do it alone. A lot of the time over the last couple of years, I've been doing this for 4.5 years now. Collaborating has been one of the weirdest experiences. I was telling a friend the other day that we don't have an industry in Southern Africa, not yet. So there's no hierarchy in terms of working with people. We're all on the same plateau. So the only thing that moves a project, if it's not money, it's passion. And when different people have different degrees of passion, it can either make a project go really far or it can make it fall apart before it starts. I've been lucky to work with great individuals, not just in Southern Africa, but across the continent. So I'm interested to hear you guys' thoughts on where the industry goes, etc. But that's me, comic books, Zimbabwe, Africa, etc.
How did your collaboration with the other guys from Nigeria come about?
So the comic book Nani is published by Kugali. There used to be a curating company. Company is a strong word. A collective. They would say anything that's anime or anything that's animation, anything that's games, anything that's film, anything that's comics that's coming out of Africa, they would put it onto a catalog that's accessible to anybody. And they would also interview people from across the continent. I happened to be just starting my journey, and I got put in touch with them. So I did 1 or 2 podcasts with them. It was called the Tao of Otaku. I think if you really deep dive on Google, you will find one of those old episodes. But they pivoted from curating content to making original content. So I had a friendly relationship with them. They knew that I could ink/draw comics. So there's a colorist from Venezuela, there's a writer from the UK, and then I'm doing the line art, assisting the main artist. And yeah, it was a great comic. It's nice to see different people's takes on scripts. I mean, there's as many scripts as there are people. So it's always fascinating to read someone's insight into what a creative process is.
Yeah, it's great to see. Also, you've been very useful on Instagram lately, posting some very good tips on how to do comic book related things, like doing lettering, for instance. That one stands out to me because that's kind of one of those very overlooked parts of creating a comic book. And it's so great that you're actually taking the time out to formalize your thoughts and to put it in a kind of a format that really makes sense to somebody as a comic book artist, comic book person myself, to be able to see the advice that you're giving that could definitely help out the next person that's working in the whole process.
Yeah. I mean, I personally love lettering so much. It makes or breaks a comic for me. You could have amazing art, amazing characters, amazing colors, and then someone uses Times New Roman, and it's like, what are you doing? It does contribute to the visual language. That's not a pun. It does contribute to the visual language of the comic, and you're right. It gets overlooked. It's usually, just slap on the words afterwards. And a really ill thought out lettering plan, you'll see that sometimes the bubbles go over the people's faces, or there wasn't consideration made for how much dialogue is happening in a comic. So I think one of the reasons why I put that up on Instagram was because when I was starting out, it was very hard to get A, information, and B, talk to a professional and be like, hey, I want to get into comics. I have questions, but I don't know what those questions are. Yeah. Yeah, starting out was wild. I reached out to a lot of people, you being one of them, and I got very few replies. And when I did, it was helpful. So I want to do the same for someone who's starting out.
That's awesome. Paying it forward. All right, thanks, Bill. We're gonna swap over to Mark.
Yeah, I'm actually a filmmaker, and then I used to be a storyboard artist as well, and yeah, I was struggling to get people to read my one film script and getting irritated. So I thought it's a story I really want to tell. So I thought, damn it, I'm gonna take time out and draw the thing out. So yeah, I mean, my work's always pretty off and on. So in the off parts, I'd spend my time drawing, and it took about 3 years, but finally, yeah, finished the Oracle Machine. Yeah, excited to join the comic community. I feel like a bit of a newbie. I don't know much about what's happening in industry, on the ground, but I'm looking forward to finding out.
I think it's always a trial by fire for everybody. I always advise people, just get going, just start doing your actual story that you want to tell. Normally these days, my advice is choose something that's a little bit shorter, right? So don't go for something that's a magnum opus, just in case, because it's kind of difficult to sustain your energy. But you seem to have done that.
If you can look in behind me, there's boxes. Those are 500 copies of the damn thing. Now I'm just going to sell. Yeah, went big.
Okay.
Made sense. Yeah. Lockdown. So I was going to have a launch, and lockdown happened. So now they're filling up my study.
Yeah. It was all going to be at FanCon on a table with you signing it off.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. Can you give us a little bit more of a background on the actual story itself? Just kind of a plot summary, so that for the person that's never heard of it before, so they know what the story is about.
Yeah. So, well, I come from my side. I was very interested in dreams, and I was thinking about doing a documentary on dream making, and I'm also very interested in AI. And then I decided to come up with a story that combines the two. So basically, it's about a Cape Town girl, Lena Jacobs, and she's haunted by this weird dream. And she works as a tele salesperson in a company, and she loses her job to a new computer that can phone people up and ask them their opinions. So without giving too much away, in anger she steals this computer, and she sets it to try and ask the computer, what does a dream mean? And it's kind of a complicated dream, impossible dream. So the computer starts connecting with other computers on the internet, because it uses distributed processing, trying to answer this dream, and it gets bigger and bigger, takes over the whole internet. CIA get involved, come looking for her. All takes place in Cape Town. High action. Badly drawn.
Well, let's talk about the Cape Town side of things. Why I find it interesting. I always do when people do the local setting versus using some nondescript coastal city, or calling it something that is a nondescript kind of place where you could do a setting, versus specifically choosing Cape Town to tell your story. And was there any specific reason for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, I'm from Cape Town, so I know it very well, and I love Cape Town, and I think I was also coming from a film perspective, and I feel like Cape Town is underrepresented. I mean, Table Mountain, one of the greatest wonders in the world, and you never see it on film, so it's like a natural asset that you got to try and show off. It's just sitting there. It's so obvious to use it. And then I'm also very interested in the history of consciousness, how humans developed, and of course, the whole Cape Town region South Africa is the cradle of humankind. Cape Town itself is where humans, like 150,000 years ago, they think they first woke up. And the story is all about AI and waking up. So it kind of made sense to bring it all together here in Cape Town. It ends up in a desert outside Cape Town. Like an Africa burn party. Because that's also film. It's just throwing in a lot of interesting visual elements, and trying to show off Cape Town at the same time.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I have no issue with it. As you may or may not know, the last thing I worked on was Uncharted Waters, which is about a Cape Town kind of legend, Van Hunks, and that character does kind of relate to Cape Town, not in the story itself, the one that we were doing, but it definitely focuses on the southern part of Africa.
Cool.
Just a question for you both, with regards to where you think a possible way would be to go, because obviously you've done your comic books. Bill's been around for a while. We all know that we experience that thing where we are at events and we happen to sell comic books at events. And I have a very interesting example of the guys from Nigeria explaining to us just the other day how their business model is a proper business model.
It's a real business. It's a real industry. That's
yeah. Just your impression of how do you get past that obstacle, that ability to distribute what you're actually creating out there?
First off, I really like Uncharted Waters. It's one of my favorite stories in the sector. I'm very sad that the series is over. But I think there was a good model in there of having an anthology, because a lot of people want to make stories, but not everybody wants to self-publish. Not everybody wants to, find out the dimensions for the printing cost or the difference between CMYK and RGB and all the other technical issues that come with production. They want to make the story. Like Mark was saying, like sometimes you can't get it out in one medium, let's get it out in another, but the means sometimes isn't there. And I found that a lot of people want to make stories, but an anthology, and I'm really thinking of like Shonen Jump in Japan, where you get 13 to 17 stories in a black and white book. The Shonen Jump company handles the talent, like they bring in people who have their own stories, and they publish based on popularity, and they're really churning out numbers in Japan. They often like make fun of the Western comics. It's like, oh, we sold 10,000 comics in a year, and it's like that's a week in Japan. And I'm a part of a lot of groups on Facebook, and not all of them professional. Some of them just like South African manga artists. So people will come and they will have art, and again, like the thing I'm doing on Instagram is people have questions about how to make a comic book, and it's at that very grassroots level that you find that information is lacking, that the talent pool is usually self-interested. People are all out for themselves. This is making me super sad. But collaboration is hard. Like I said, if there's no money motivating a team and it's just passion, it's very hard to say, let's make a book and split the profits if you don't know if you're going to make a profit, or you don't know if you're going to make a sale. You go to a convention with like all your books, and you just hope that you're not next to someone more famous than you. I've been in this situation twice at Comic-Con Africa, where like there's like just the monsters of industry around me, and having to pitch new ideas. I think that's one of the things that's very difficult in South Africa / Southern Africa, when you are next to not just individuals, but if you're next to someone who is selling Dungeons and Dragons, if you're next to someone who's selling Green Lantern, they don't have to market themselves as part of their pitch. Someone just comes to that table, and even if you've never played with Dungeons and Dragons, there's just this ubiquity of knowledge where they're like, oh, Dungeons and Dragons, I didn't know I could buy cards. I'm gonna buy a deck. It's an impulse buy because the brand is so there. Same thing with Green Lantern. But when someone comes up to my table, it's like, did you draw this? Did you make this? Are you making money? And I'm like, if you buy the comic, I'll be making money. It's quite a struggle to make yourself valid, or make ourselves valid, to get past those questions. So someone comes and says, hey, I saw Kwezi on Instagram, or I saw someone else holding a Kwezi. I want a Kwezi. I saw someone else reading Captain South Africa. And I don't think I can say we're not yet there, because we have Comic-Con Africas, we have FanCons, we have ViewCons, we have UpCons. We have all these events where you have access to the creators, you have access to people who are, you know, doing the thing that you would assume is the industry level thing to do. And it's one of the reasons why I liked going to FanCon last year. You have people coming out with their number ones, which is very clearly printed on an A5 that they printed somewhere. You see, like, the margins are not like international standard. And then you have like Brian Spelfreeze right next to you. And Brian's like, hey, let me see your comic. Let's talk shop. And I think it's a great place to be, but we can't be here too long. Yeah, I think. Thoughts? Yeah. Before I ramble forever.
No, that was. I mean, sorry. I agree with it. No, I was just gonna say. I was nodding all the time there. I mean, I agree totally. It's got a long way to go. But it's interesting. I mean, do we grow the home market, or do we try and sell overseas, or how can you do both? So I was in Germany 2 years ago. I was just reaching this off my shelf, and just like you go to like the train station, and they got booksellers everywhere. And here's this is a comic magazine about the comic industry. It's like a thick called Zack or whatever. And it's just, I mean, they give you like a couple of pages of the comic, and then every second page is like comic shops. I mean, I counted about 150 comic shops in Germany. Yeah. So they've got a really big market. So I'm wondering, I don't know how it's done, but it must be helpful to tap into that overseas market.
It might be useful to look at translations of your work and approaching those European publishers, which is what Daniel and I did as part of our mission to get Uncharted Waters published. But we're still in that process, and all we're getting so far is, it's interesting, thank you, but no thank you. So I guess the biggest advice I would give to anybody who's doing it right now, who's looking at that kind of thing, is possibly know which publishers you want to approach right off the bat. Like, we really felt strongly that we knew who we wanted to speak to. And then also don't set your heart on somebody. Like for me, the ideal company would have been, in the USA, it would have been Image Comics or Dark Horse. Those guys would have been awesome. And they did have a look at our proposal, and they did mail us back to say, thanks, but no thanks. But then have that backup plan, have the next 5 people or 10 people that you want to send it to. And I think that's a way to go. I think for me, one of the important things about these events like FanCon, Comic-Con, and events where you've got international artists is that we have an opportunity to speak to somebody who's actually connected to that kind of world that has a lot of influence. For instance, when Ben Abernathy was here, he is the guy that I had a look at Carl Mosterd's artwork, who previously did the Little Five and was also contributed to Velocity and some other things that happened in the past. And obviously Carl's had all these years of doing comic books. So Ben Abernathy had a look at his work, and that was facilitated by Jason Masters, for instance, who was a Johannesburg artist who's working for DC and happened to be at the event itself. And just that contact and the sharing of here's Ben's email, asked us to contact him directly, and from there the conversation went. And now Carl's doing stuff for DC. He's doing the Unkillables comic book for them. So that access is something that we don't normally have. And just getting that opportunity, like you said, Brian Spelfreeze, I'd be so hesitant to show him any of my stuff, but still I would love to hear his feedback on whatever I've done. So I think it's just great if we could put out the prayer to FanCon in future to get somebody to specifically come and do that kind of thing, a talent scout for Marvel or DC or Image or Dark Horse or whatever the company, Fantagraphics, because I think there's a lot of guys here whose work is suitable for more genre kind of fiction that's a bit more not so much related to superhero stuff, that could actually do with having their work seen by some international talent scout. But Either that, or we need to get some Japanese guys to come and have a look at these guns.
Yes.
Manga and anime kind of styles, because there's some really good guys coming through as well.
Speaking of genre, one of the things you had said was, or even just if you walk around a FanCon, you see that not a lot of people are doing superhero comics, and that's a big thing in Nigeria / West Africa, or just in general. When you do your first comic, it's probably a superhero, something or another. That's a bastardization of like the Trinity. But there was a journal that was written about South African comics the other year, I think like 2 years ago, just speaking about the leaning away from political stories and more into fictional fantasy settings. Where do you think we go as a region / South Africa in terms of telling our own stories in that light?
Yeah, I've gone through this very long process. You know that I've been involved with comic books forever in South Africa, and I kind of started off with the very first thing that I wanted to do was a John Constantine kind of ripoff, a guy that would use our kind of African kind of magic versus what John Constantine was doing. So I started off from that perspective of wanting to do a comic books like that back in the Gubu days versus doing superhero stuff, because I didn't have that much of I want to push the international thing. I had a much more local focus. And then over time, it shifted away from that completely. For me, it became much more about how do you make your stuff accessible to international audiences. That was a thing that I started thinking. And to do that, you obviously have to look at what the biggest companies in the USA, for instance, are doing, and then emulate what they're doing. And then again, more time passes and you sort of get to a point where now I'm doing Uncharted Waters with Daniel, and especially when we were doing Velocity, and I kind of noticed that the contributors were doing stories that the overall genre was fantasy and sci-fi, but there was a lot of stuff that felt grounded to the place where the person came from, and that kind of convinced me again that what we should be doing is telling the stories that we want to tell. I don't know that that's the proper model to follow, that you kind of say, I will write it and the audience will find me. I don't think that's the best, most successful way to make money out of it. In fact, I've had this conversation many times with people, and it usually ends up with, you've got to kind of decide, sadly enough, whether this is for love or for money.
That's a personal attack. That's a personal attack. It's too early.
No. It's a, I would love everybody to make money out of the deal. That's personally how I feel that the South African industry will really grow, if somebody put money behind it, and if artists actually got paid their worth and the guys that are writing the stories. But the successful model seems to be first figure out how to monetize it, and then from there figure out what that content would be that would fit in with the monetization side of things. So it's a more business-like approach than what we normally do.
Okay, so this is for both of you, but more so for Mark, since you and I both have stock like in the background. I'm not showing my piles of books.
Mine's in the garage, like 500 copies of Uncharted Waters.
Sure.
Or 1,000, probably 1,000.
Oof. The question is, outside of conventions, right? Because we're not yet at industry level. We are at a very cohesed community level. We all know each other. We all pretty much work together. We've worked on each other's books, etc. Post-convention or pre-convention, so off-season for us. I guess that's a weird term. Off-season, how do we put our books into the hands of people that we are not meeting? Do you think bookstores are the way to go? Do you think mail orders are the way to go? Do you think there's another methodology that we haven't explored yet in terms of, because what I've struggled with over the last couple of years is that sometimes a bookshop won't take your book because a Harry Potter, regardless of when it'll sell, it will sell. But your book, there's a risk attached to that. So do you think, because I don't know how many comic book shops are in South Africa, but there's more comic book shops in South Africa than there are in the whole of the region here. So what do you think the off-season model should be outside of conventions?
So I'm still working this out. So the one thing I wanted to say, I know from the film industry, I was talking to a Hollywood producer a while ago who made the film Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal, and he told me they sold it to Miramax for $8 million, and Miramax spent $20 million marketing it. So they spent more than double the price of the film in marketing. So that's in the film industry, but maybe the comic industry is the same, and maybe you're an artist, you're geared towards producing the thing, and for me, marketing is a whole new game, but maybe that's one thing people need to look at is how to market stuff. Advertise. I mean, if you spend 3 years making the comic, maybe you have to spend 3 years selling it as well. I don't know. But the other thing I wanted to say was, I'm checking out different things. I managed to get my comic on Comixology, which is I was worried about that, but they took it. And that's nice because I can just email people overseas and say, here it is, check it out. So that's one way to get it out there, I think. I don't know, I haven't got any money yet, and I've only had one review, so maybe it's not going to work out. I don't know. And the other thing was, I noticed you can sell books on Take-A-Lot as well, although they charge you rental for leaving your stock with them, bastards. So,
hang on, I'm making notes. Take-A-Lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, books. No, but nothing as good as going into a proper bookstore like Reader's Den, of course. Of course. No, but seriously. But for hard to reach places, maybe you can use mail order. I mean, but of course, Reader's Den, I'm sure, deliver everywhere anyway. So maybe it's just about marketing, getting it out there. Yeah.
Probably is. Comixology is a good place to start, though. The digital idea of having it out on some kind of platform that will sell it, that is definitely useful. The amount of times that I've been at events where people are pretty interested because you've got X amount of rands to spend at an event, right? So you've got to choose, what am I spending the stuff on? Is it Green Lantern, like you said, or is it this guy's unknown comic book? Hard choices. So often people are interested enough, and you can never guarantee that they'll actually buy it if you send them to another platform, if you send them to the Comixology kind of thing. But having the option there is good. To be able to say to somebody that you could get it in that kind of a space. There's another one that I'm trying to remember what the name of it is, which is, it's got a lot of manga stuff on it, but it's actually made more for comic books to be read on your actual phone itself. So it is still a paying kind of model. So you would get X amount of money out of it, but it's your comic book in that format that it fits on a phone more comfortably than it does. But then you've got to approach your lettering, for instance, different than you would if you were going to view it on something else. So there's that slight restriction. But I think it's also set up that it can be read on a tablet anyway. So I just can't remember what it's called.
Sorry, the other thing I'm trying is, the first third of my graphic novel I'm giving away free on the website, just to try and get people in. But I think it's actually a bit, I should have made it like the first 25 pages. It's the first 50 pages, because the comic only gets interesting after 50 pages, possibly. But originally I serialized it because I think like having shorter things is also a good way to get it out there, or putting it in anthologies. Anthologies is brilliant. I mean, that must be a wonderful way forward.
How many pages in total is your? Sorry, I was getting very interesting.
No. You.
150.
Yeah. And you don't feel that you should have done that film thing where you get an editor in there and the person just, the scene doesn't work for me, doesn't advance the characters, it doesn't move the plot forward, let's just cut it out.
The script was a very long time in the making, and I drew it in one first, and that kind of helped me plot it out. I mean, I've been writing the script for like I don't know how many years, so it's really been through a long process just to get there. So it really was a finished script, and it's in a filmic kind of way. But But I mean, yeah, I mean, I was going to do a color one, and then it was taking so long.
Yeah, no.
It's like, you know, and now I look at it and I go, shit, if I just spent like another few weeks doing it, tidying the drawings a bit more, you know, like it hurts me to look at it and see drawings that aren't right. But you got to call it at some point, you know.
You gotta call it, like, that's one of the bigger things. A lot, like, one of the reasons why comics end up in developmental hell is that I can draw this panel better, and you end up redrawing the whole comic over and over, and then you never get it out because you're trying to get it perfect. But one of the things you said, Mark, it was just one word, but it branches off into a completely different thing. Serialization. Do you think the serialization of content contributes to the growth of an industry? Like, say, do you think the fact that some comics come out once a year, twice a year, versus once a week or versus once a month contributes to how fast we are growing? Both of you.
Let me speak from my experience with Sector, because that was the model. It was serialized fiction. And what I was going to say earlier about the events thing, like FanCon, for instance, normally my voice is gone by the end of the weekend because, have you seen Sector before? No, I've never seen it before. Okay, let me tell you all about Sector. And then I start telling them about it. But that graph of exactly how many times I had to repeat that became less over time, because some people would walk up and they would go, hey, so cool to see you guys are still back, or you're still working on this, and it just simplifies the conversation, and there'd always be a certain amount of people that knew the book because they'd seen it before. So to that extent, the serialization actually did help us to build somewhat of a fan base. You could kind of count on X amount of people to always buy it. It did actually help. I do feel that to some extent we managed to build a stronger fan base for it, and also for Uncharted Waters, especially for Daniel and myself, where people would know the overall brand that is Sector, but within that, they would specifically know that you two are these guys that are working on this thing, and obviously they have questions about what's next for that, for instance, for Uncharted Waters. So the conversation changed. It became much more of, let's catch up on where we actually are, what the plans are, how far we are from the end. And then that person's lingering at your table and having this interesting conversation with you that encourages other people to also not see you as this horrible salesperson that's just trying to sell them stuff. So they join the conversation, you know, so.
Okay, so serialization is a big plus for growth.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. Same thing with Velocity as well. And Velocity was much more spread out. It wasn't serialized, but an anthology title that had a life every 6 months or so. People would look forward to that, and the launch would be a really big thing because it would be an opportunity to kind of see if there was an evolutionary leap in terms of either the storytelling or the artwork or whatever else. So people were really interested in regularly seeing the same thing.
Okay.
I suppose we're all creatures of habit.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I was inspired. Well, when I was drawing my thing, I used to read, go to the second-hand bookshops and try and buy 2001 AD, which is kind of depressing because it's so well drawn, like from the 80s.
Yeah.
But that's totally serialized. I mean, and you find yourself getting hooked into one story, and then like one is missing, and you try and finding the missing part. So I think also for back issues, it works, you know, because you can be selling issue 4 and 5, and someone's hooked into it and they want to go back. So and you can have multiple storylines running at the same time. So maybe it can run alongside other comics. I mean, maybe even if you've got a graphic novel, you can contribute to an anthology. You know, like a bunch of guys who've got graphic novels out can all get together and make anthologies on the side.
Yeah.
Do you think if like all is a strong word, because Cape Town versus everybody in the Eastern Cape, it's very hard to make those two people meet. Do you think if everybody pooled their content together, do you think a Netflix model for South African comics works? So like, just, you know, you pay like 40 Rand. That's an arbitrary number. But you you pay 40 Rand and then you have access to all the books digitally. Do you think that works, or do you think that's a bad way of
Well,
yeah.
I was going to jump in and say, like, yeah, I discovered with Comixology, you set your price, you think, cool, I'm going to get $7 every time someone reads my graphic novel. Then I discovered Amazon actually have a subscriber service. So people pay $10 a month to read as many comics as they can or want to. And you get a percentage of the number of pages they've read during the month, whatever. It can, you might get 10 cents instead of $7, whatever. But it's interesting. That's the model where it's a subscriber model. Yeah, I think Marvel maybe do the same. So maybe maybe that. But yeah, we got such a bad culture of. I mean, we don't have a good distribution system. Like there's no. I think. I mean, it's getting it out is the challenge, and maybe around here.
Yeah.
Maybe online is the way forward.
Yeah. I heard Bill say that previously, the whole Netflix model, and wasn't sure what he meant by that, but now I get it. I do think that is something very worthwhile to look at. And then you obviously get people to agree or to disagree that they would prefer to not be part of it, and that's absolutely fine. How do you track who is your top sellers? Exactly the same way that Netflix and those people do it as well, right? So you're going to see which are the ones that people are most interested in by just tracking traffic to your site, and then you've got an idea of what content they're interested in. And you might notice that it's not a genre specific thing, so it might be that the only stuff that people look at would be all the manga stuff, and nobody's looking at anything beyond that point. And then you also have an idea of the direction to go in for the future of whatever you're doing. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I think it's well worth pursuing for somebody who's got the ability to convince other people to actually see the worth of it and how to put something together like that model. Because at the moment, like I say, 1,000 comic books in my garage, not earning me any money at all. Right? So if it was sitting out there on the internet, it might be earning me zero, or it might be earning me 5 people have read it in the past hour because they've seen what we are talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
go to sacomics.net and you can read all of this stuff there.
And there are 180 countries in the world who could tune in. It's not just. So maybe digital is the way forward. Maybe Reader's Den should have a monthly subscriber service.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. We can definitely pitch it to them. Okay, guys, let's have some final thoughts and then we're going to wrap it up. Anything else that you guys would really absolutely want people to know about yourself, your comic book, or anything else? Any advice for the kids out there who want
make nonsense, make bad comics. You can't make a good comic if you've never made a bad comic before. Put out your number one. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be awful. The lettering is going to be trash. The body language is going to be trash. The flow of it is going to be trash. But it's out there. People are going to give you criticism and comments. It's going to hurt. And then you take all of that advice, not all of it, because some of it is just a personal attack. And then you make a better number 2. And then you take advice from that and make a better number 3. You can't have 80 years of comics if you don't start with day 1 of comics. Yeah, I think that's my advice.
Picking up what you say, I would say everyone out there should remember issue 1 can be a collector's item because, could progress. So grab every issue 1 you can get, whoever did it. And I'd also say maybe there are no bad comics. It's just about the context. Maybe somebody should start an anthology of bad comics. That would be fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Why not? And you can have collector's items within that whole, be fun. Everyone has to start somewhere. So just do it. Go for it.
I could be the first contributor to that bad comics thing immediately, just like that. I think my advice to the kids out there would be separate yourself from what you do. Separate your it'll help you when somebody has something to say about your comic books, because then you can hear. I've received criticism on stuff that I've done, and I've taken it very poorly in the past. And with the amount of time that's passed, a year later, I look back and I realize that person actually gave me such good advice with regards to my writing, or with regards to the artwork that I was doing, with regards to the research that I did on a story, or whatever it might be. But I was so blinded by how they said it, or how I perceived they said it, that I did not actually listen to what they were saying at that time. So just separate yourself from what you do. That will protect you a little bit as well when people do crit your work and they don't give you useful advice and they just tell you that your stuff is absolute shit. So don't listen to people like that. That's not criticism. That's not advice. Advice is you can improve yourself by doing the following things. That's advice. Just telling somebody their stuff is terrible and trash without giving them an idea of how to improve on it is not.
Yeah, they want to be doing what you do, but yeah, it's always also good to get advice when it is actually advice. So yeah, take it all in, and yeah.
Awesome, guys. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for being part of the talk tonight. And thanks to the guys from Readers Den for always being there and supporting us through all of these things and being the fantastic FanCon organizers. And we hope that everybody enjoys this weekend of FanCon celebration, because FanCon is definitely an event that needs to be celebrated a lot more than it gets credit for.
True story.
Yes.
Looking forward to checking everyone's work out. Everyone, yeah. It's thank you.
Mark, Moray, Ray, thanks for coming through.
Cheers, guys.